Hello Year 10, this is our next lesson looking at the nervous system. Last session we were looking at the fact that there are two ways our bodies can detect changes and control our bodies. The first of those is the nervous system, using electrical signals going along nerve cells. The other one is called the endocrine system, where chemical signals travel around the body through the blood, and these are known as hormones. We also looked at the fact that the nervous system is made up of two parts. The first is known as the central nervous system, sometimes called CNS, which is the brain and spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system, which is made up of all the nerve cells that carry information to and from the brain. We looked further at parts of the nervous system, learning the following terms. So receptors are parts of the body that detect changes, such as a change in temperature. The coordination center is where information gets processed. The body coordinates its actions. And effectors are parts of the body that actually carry out actions, like your muscles moving your arms or legs. So can you remember what the main receptors in the body are? As a clue, think of the five senses. So the five senses are sight, touch, taste, hearing, and smell. And these parts of the body all contain receptors. The eye has receptors that detect light. Skin has receptors that detect touch and temperature. Your tongue has receptors for taste. The ear has receptors for sound. And your nose has receptors for smell. So the coordination centers in the body, or the central nervous system, are made up of the brain and the spinal cord. And finally, the effectors make actions happen. They have an effect. So muscles moving the body are a good example. We started to put all these parts of the system together last time, and here is an example. Receptors in the eye might detect light and therefore see a ball coming towards you. The coordinator, in this case the brain, makes a decision to catch the ball. And the effectors move the muscles in your arms that enable you to catch the ball. So the receptor will feed into the coordinator, which will feed into the effector. So the nerve cells are what actually connect the receptors via the central nervous system to the effectors. They're what actually carries those electrical signals or impulses. Nerve cells are also known as neurons, so that's a word you need to know. And there are three types of neuron in the body, depending on which bit they're connecting. So sensory neurons take signals from the receptors or from the senses into the central nervous system. Relay neurons pass that signal on, a bit like in a relay race. So they take signals through the central nervous system. The motor neurons, on the other hand, will take a signal from the brain or the central nervous system to the muscles to make them move. This diagram shows how the different parts of the central nervous system are all connected together. So on the left we have our eye with its receptors in this case detecting light. A sensory neuron carries the signal from the eye to the brain. Inside the brain, a relay neuron takes the signal through the brain, and that's where the brain makes a decision about what to do after it's seen something with the eye. Then the brain sends a signal using a motor neuron from the brain to the muscles that makes the muscles move, and in this case they were catching a ball. Here I'm showing exactly the same thing but on a flow chart. So at the left hand side we have our receptor, which passes a signal along a sensory neuron, which passes a signal through a relay neuron in the brain, which passes a signal along a motor neuron and then ends up with an effector. And this is the same pathway that signals always take as they pass through the central nervous system. So now I'm using the flowchart to show a different example. In this case, I see a cake and I reach out to pick it up. So I start with a receptor. In this case, it's my eye that sees the cake. The signal passes through a sensory neuron to the brain. The brain then has the signal pass through it via a relay neuron. That's where I make a decision about what to do. I then decide to pass a signal down a motor neuron to the effector, which is the muscle in my hand that picks up the cake. And here I'm making a decision in the brain to take the cake. So this is another example. In this case, I stand on a pin and I move my foot away when it hurts. Again, on the left-hand side, we start with a receptor, in this case, pain sensors in my feet. The signal passes along a sensory neuron to the central nervous system. Again, it passes along a relay neuron and then down a motor neuron to the effector, which this time is a muscle in my foot that moves the foot away from the pin. The difference is, this is what we call a reflex reaction. The signal doesn't go to the brain. I don't have to think about it. My body reacts automatically to move my foot away from where it hurts. Rather than taking time to send the signal all the way to the brain and have me think about whether I want to move my foot, my body just moves my foot straight away. It's a very good defense mechanism, a very good way of stopping us from hurting ourselves. So a reflex reaction is one where you just react. There's no decision made. The impulse travels through your spinal cord rather than going all the way to the brain, so it's quicker. Other examples might be blinking if something gets near your eyes, sneezing if dust gets into your nose or throat, or pulling away from something that's hot. This diagram looks a lot more complicated, but in fact is exactly the same as the flow diagrams we used in the previous slides. On the right-hand side this time, the hand is hovering over a candle, so it's feeling something very hot. Receptors in the skin will detect the heat and send a signal along the sensory neuron, which in this case is a dark red colour. It goes along the sensory neuron to the central nervous system, in this case the spinal cord. Here the green shows the relay neuron going through the spinal cord, and then it goes along a motor neuron, here in blue, to the muscle in the arm, which pulls the hand away from the heat. So this is another example of a reflex reaction. If you put your hand on something hot, you don't need to think about it, you just pull away automatically. The other thing we can see more clearly in the diagram is that there are gaps between the neurons, and these gaps have a special name. They are called synapses. Okay, so now we've been through the lesson. You'll see that below I've given an example of a web page that you might want to go to. It's another BBC Bitesize, just pages 2 and 3, and they will go over the key information as well. I would suggest going back and making sure you know the keywords. They're all written in red. There are quite a lot of new words for this topic, so it's worth taking time learning them. You'll see on the next couple of slides that I've also put some definitions and translations into other languages. This time round, I've attached a worksheet to show my homework, so you can try some exam questions. The answers are also there, so you can see if you got them right. And then finally, I'd like you to have a go at the quiz on Show My Homework, so I can see how you're getting on. Here are the keywords and their definitions. It might be worth pausing the video at this point to go through them and make sure you know them all. And finally, here are some translations of those keywords in case it makes it easier for you to learn them and understand their meanings. Again, you might want to pause the video here and make sure you know these words.